going on, everybody? It's Nick here with you. Welcome back to the channel, and welcome back to a special rock album review for Incubus and Morning View XXIII. The band has re-recorded and re-released their classic album from 2001, 23 years later. And for this rock album review, I'm joined by a very special guest. I have Danielle here with me. How's it going, Danielle?
Well, how are you?
I'm doing okay. Welcome back to the channel. If anybody recognizes Danielle, we did a vlog back in the fall when we went to go see Don Broco in Toronto. We did a little bit of a vlog about going to see them, and that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was. We'll just forget about the whole getting there part where we almost died from somebody ramming us off the road.
Yes.
Because of road rage and sitting on the Gardner Expressway for an hour and a half.
Yeah, that was not fun. Yeah, we didn't really show that in the actual video, but you can check out that vlog, and you can check out all the fun parts about us going to see Don Broco. So we thought that'd be cool to have you back here after doing that vlog and talk about Incubus and Morning View XXIII, because we're both big Incubus fans. We both grew up with this album back when it came out. I don't know if it shows our age that we remember when this album came out, but thought it'd be a good idea to have you here on the show to talk about the original album, talk about Morning View XXIII, do a little comparison of what we think might be the strengths of both different versions of Morning View XXIII. And before we get to the re-recording of Morning View, let's talk about the original album. What do you remember? How did you get into Incubus in the first place? How did you first hear this album?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for inviting me on your show to review this.
No problem.
I feel like I'm in a job interview or accepting an award right now.
Yes, Danielle. What do you think of Incubus? Tell us your whole history of listening to this band.
I am honored to be on the spot because this album was pivotal to my coming of age as a young troubled person.
An emo teen. In the early 2000s.
Yeah, for sure. Emo teen, late teen. So in terms of my background with Incubus, I think when music videos were still a thing, when Drive came out, I think when I first saw that, I was like, okay, who are they? And started looking into them, obviously checked out Make Yourself. And then that kind of engaged me to go backwards. And I went back to Science. That's kind of where I was with them. I was in high school for sure. I was definitely a troubled teen, trying to figure myself out, trying to figure out, how to deal with life and boys and, dealing with different people. So getting into Incubus was definitely a thing. I've been a big fan for a while. So by the time Morning View came out, I was already a pretty big Incubus fan. By the time I had discovered them with, Make Yourself and whatnot. And I remember kind of some of the talk and chatter around the release of Morning View that it was going to be a little bit of a pivot from what we would normally expect from Incubus, in the sense of they're recording it at some faraway beach house, and kind of the way that they're talking about how it's going to be produced, and what the acoustics are going to be and why they're going to this empty house to do this. I was like, okay, this is going to be different, but intriguing nonetheless. So I think at that time, I'm not sure if I was still driving. 2001, right? So that was 23 years ago, which would have made me 15, which means no. I was like, Mom, please take me to Best Buy to get the CD. That's what I remember from it, and listening to it on repeat and just being like, oh, wow, this is kind of one of those albums where you can listen to it from front to back without skipping.
Yeah, it's one of those. Every single track on this record is good.
Yeah, for sure. And they all segue into each other really well.
Yeah, so it was definitely one of those influential albums when it came out back in the early 2000s. By the way, if you hear any snoring, that is our dog Lily, who's also part of this review. But yeah, for me too, I was an Incubus fan. My entry point into the band was Make Yourself when that came out back in 1999, and so I was into the band. Songs like Pardon Me and Drive and Stellar, all those songs that were so huge. They were big songs, and we were saying that Incubus kind of went on a little bit of a trajectory that they got more mainstream with every album that they did back then. Science was not super heavy. It wasn't heavy metal or hardcore or anything like that, but it was a little bit less accessible. A little bit, I think we were mentioning earlier, when we were talking about it off camera, about it having a little bit of that Primus influence.
Yeah, for sure. So when I think about Science, I definitely think about Primus, kind of that really heavy funk feel and bass kind of driven music.
Yeah.
But it was kind of just like a dirty funk.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like Brandon Boyd's vocals were a lot different back then. Whereas now, you know, they've kind of like revolutionized into this more melodic kind of feel.
Right.
But it's really cool because, you know, up until Morning View, I was still into them despite like that whole change in kind of sound. And usually I'm pretty critical of that. As you know,
Yeah.
I'm always like, no, like the old stuff is the best. Like,
You love the old stuff.
I love the old
The
stuff.
classics.
Yeah. The only reason why I know about anything new really and you know, in the last 10 or 15 years is because you've introduced it to me this year.
Yeah.
Because I'm so judgy.
Yeah. Well, I'm telling you, Incubus 8, that's a great album. Actually, well, you know, I forgot to mention, I did a rock albums ranked here on the channel. So people can go check out, you know, see the thoughts about some of the newer albums. But yeah, it was more of a mainstream poppy direction. They went more mainstream on Make Yourself and then further mainstream on Morning View. And yeah, I remember buying the album when it came out in 2001, buying it here on CD. Still have it. Still
An
the
ancient
classic,
relic.
an ancient relic of having it on CD. But like, what were your favorite tracks from when Morning View first came out back in 2001? If you think back to a younger Danielle from 2001, what were her favorite songs when she first heard this record?
Yeah, so I'm not going to say Wish You Were Here, even though that's the song that obviously kind of pulled me into listening to the rest of the album. Even though it was the first release off the album, was going to listen to the album anyway, right? Yeah, it was very kind of overplayed. As I listen to it now, like looking back on it 2 decades ago, I think I enjoy Wish You Were Here more, but I still wouldn't say at this point it's still a favorite. So I'm probably going to go with Circles, Nice to Know You.
Yeah.
I really like Are You In?
Yeah.
And you know, you just gotta you have to say Mexico just because of what it is.
Yeah.
That song.
It's a great song.
Yeah.
And a meaningful song for Brandon Boyd, I suppose. It sounds like somebody had crossed him, you know, like.
Oh yeah. It reminds me kind of what's that song? You know, In the Air Tonight by Phil Collins,
Yes.
where he's like, you know, you see me drowning, you see me struggling, but you're not doing anything, so fuck you.
Oh yeah, exactly. A little bit of swearing on YouTube. That's okay. Well, you know, yeah, for me too, Nice to Know You has always been a super strong opening song. Yeah. I always loved the heaviness of the riff on that, and then the funkiness of the verses. And then it breaks into that pre-chorus. It's always kind of like a little bit poppier. There are a lot of poppier moments, but it's still got some heaviness on it as well. Like Circles, that's got a great riff on there.
Oh yeah,
that's got one of the better riffs on the record. Blood on the Ground is one of my favorite tracks on the record. Another heavy track. That really shows that they didn't go full on pop, and they never really have in general. Like Incubus has never really gone full on pop into anything that they've done. They've always maintained that rock edge. But yeah, I'm with you on tracks like Mexico, Warning, and then of course the final track, Aqueous Transmission, however you say it. Yeah, it's really good.
I noticed it's got this kind of Oriental vibe.
Yeah, it's really cool. I don't know what Mike Eisinger is playing on that. I know he's playing a specific instrument on there.
Yeah, is it like possibly not a sitar?
It doesn't sound like a sitar, but it sounds like some sort of harp or some sort of stringed instrument.
I feel like it could be some.
Let us know in the comments.
Yeah,
I'm sure somebody will know and will let us know for sure.
Some variation of some kind of stringed instrument.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's talk about this Incubus like 23 Morning View thing, because I'm not really quite sure what the reasons were for re-recording this album, because you have a lot of other artists re-recording albums. Taylor Swift is the one, namely, who's been re-recording her albums to get the rights back. So I'm not sure. And I think Incubus might be doing something similar with Morning View, is having these re-recordings as a way to reclaim the recording rights or the songwriting rights to this particular record. And they had to re-record it. And that's completely fine. I think they had to really fix the snare sound on the original Morning View, because it sounds paper thin. Like on most of their songs, like it doesn't really feel like the production on the original Morning View always had the punch that it needed to have. I always felt like it was a little bit muddy in the production department, but
interesting in comparison to like the 23rd release.
Yeah, I think so.
So you're saying that Okay, hold on.
Yeah.
So you're saying that
This one actually is a little bit, well, it's got modern recording technology, right? So I think it's a little bit clearer in the production. It sounds a little bit brighter overall than this original one, but I might be just being picky on that one.
You know what? I'm gonna have to raise my hand and say I actually thought the complete opposite.
Oh, really?
I thought the recording quality was actually higher on the 2001
Okay.
version.
Yeah.
I don't know if
Fair
it's because
enough.
maybe my hearing is going to shit.
Yeah.
And
Mine
everything-
too. You're not the only one.
Yeah, right. And everything kind of sounds like cotton balls right now. But I think I enjoyed the warmth of the sound on the 2001 version a little bit more.
Right.
But then again, I don't like new things
Yes, you just want to stick with
by
the original.
musicians. Exactly.
Well, you're kind of showing your hand with how you prefer the original as to this one, but we'll get to that in a little bit. But so it's funny because the band actually performed this album in full at the Hollywood Bowl in L.A. I think the fall before this came out. So last fall they did this album in full at the Hollywood Bowl, and we were saying off camera that this album does sound like pretty much a live album. If they were going to do Morning View as a live album, that this is what it would sound like.
Oh, legitimately, if like you were going to see Incubus go perform now, and they were playing tracks off of Morning View, that's exactly what you're getting off of like the 23rd like version.
Yeah, pretty much is exactly the same. Like when you think about a band re-recording an album, do you want them to stay the same? Do you want them to do it note for note and just like for like, or do you want them to do something different?
That's actually a really interesting question, because I think the whole point of re-recording it is to show some kind of difference between when the first version was recorded versus any version thereafter. So if there's going to be a re-recording, I think there should be some noticeable differences.
Right.
Whether it's a change in style, where they maybe slow down a song or add something to it or take away from it. But in terms of if you're going to do re-recording, like, what is the point if it's not going to have elements of difference?
Yeah.
Not to say that it has to be all different.
Yeah, it doesn't all have to be different, but you want it to be worthwhile enough to say that this one is different enough than the original to warrant re-listening to.
To justify the time listening to it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
that's what I was thinking.
I think in general for this, before we kind of get into a comparison of the actual tracks and the ones that we liked and the ones we felt had some big differences to them, like in general, did you think that this album succeeded in doing that? Like, to me, like, it generally was pretty much note for note of the original Morning View. There were some variations here and there, but when I was listening to it, we both listened to it multiple times. Like, we're very familiar with this. We're very familiar with this original version, and then listening to this new one a bunch of times, like, there weren't enough moments here where it jumped out to me to say, oh, that's different. There's a couple of songs, I would say maybe even a handful, that say do something a little bit different, where you were like, oh, okay, what's that? That's really different. We'll get to that in a second. But did you feel they succeeded in doing something different, or like did they succeed in whatever they were trying to do?
No.
That's a big no.
Yeah. Of course that answer is arbitrary in the sense of it depends on what angle you're taking when you listen to the re-recording. But as you mentioned, when you do a side-by-side, it's definitely not like super different at all. Like you said, there's elements of difference, which I noted earlier in my answer, that if you're going to do recording, there should be at least elements of difference, but that's all it is. It's elements of difference. Like, it's not like they tried to do something different or funky or chop up one of their songs. And I'm thinking to myself, the more and more we talk about this, I'm like, what was the point of them doing this? Are they just being like, we still got it, like we can still perform Morning View because that was one of our iconic albums? Or are they just trying to be like, this is our take on it now, 2 decades later? But then I'm like, if it was the latter, there's not a huge difference in take. Yeah,
exactly. I don't think they're out there to prove anything. It's been a while since we got new material from them. They did release an EP a couple years ago. I would prefer that they release new music as opposed to going back and redoing an old album like this.
Yeah, especially when there's no notable or like discussion worthy elements when like you compare the two.
Yeah.
So-
There's not enough. Well, let's get to the comparison of some of these songs. We have some notes here about some of the differences between the studio versions of each of these different versions of Morning View. So we'll talk about the songs that there are differences, because I feel like with a lot of the songs there aren't really a lot of differences, like we're saying. So let's talk about Nice to Know You first of all. Let's talk about, like, with this particular song. It did start out differently than the original version.
Yes.
The original version does have a prolonged kind of intro, but this one was definitely a lot longer and a little bit more involved.
Yep.
Warming things up a little bit more. The band has a new bass player on here. Nicole Rowe is the new bass player, taking over Ben Kenny in Incubus, and I think she did a really good job on here in general. But right from that get-go, it's a little bit different on Nice to Know You.
Yeah. Further to your point, it's definitely, the extended intro is even more extended on this version. It kind of reminds me of like a Tool intro where they're just playing for quite a while and you're just
Maynard's just like,
yeah.
gyrating on stage.
Yeah. Just like preparing his next move.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he is a martial arts master too. So.
Oh, that would explain a lot, I suppose.
Yeah, we'll talk about Tool in another video.
But that's kind of what I got. Is just the original version of the introduction is already long and, as you said, prolonged. In this version, it's even longer, and it seems a little bit more experimental. So I'm not sure if it needed to be as long as it was. I mean, like, I get what it was like. You could off the first couple notes, you're like, I get what you're doing. You can
they have to make it different right off the bat again, because we're talking about, like, make it worthwhile.
And I guess because it's the opening track,
right? And we both immediately were like, oh, this is there it is. What's that they're doing? Oh, that's different.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's true. Just looking at some of my notes here.
Yeah.
So basically, after the song kicks in, with the what do I have written here?
With the
Spacey sounds.
Yeah.
It's pretty much the same song as the original one. There's not much of a difference. And like, it is the opening track, right? So that's the first opportunity in the first instance where we hear Brandon Boyd's voice now, 23 years later.
Right.
So that's also interesting to note. So you're kind of like, while this whole experimental intro is going on, you're just like, what's he going to sound like when he finally starts singing 10 minutes later after this?
Yeah.
And I know you've talked to me about how, like, you've seen some forums online where they're like shitting on his like voice now. It doesn't sound like him. It sounds bad. Like, where the hell were you 23 years ago?
Yeah.
Is anybody the same person in any way, shape, or form that they were 23 years ago?
Yeah.
They've been on tour. Like, the guy's been singing all of his life. Of course he's going to sound different. He's 23 years older.
Yeah.
His voice has been through a lot. So, like, just acknowledging all the trolls out there, they're like, oh, he sounds so different. What do you expect 23 years later from a vocalist?
And he still sounds great. I thought
He does.
For the majority of this album, he pulled it off quite well. Like,
yeah, I think he's got a bit more of a falsetto thing, kind of, maybe not maybe falsetto, sorry. Let me correct myself. More of a vibrato thing going on.
Yeah.
Where his voice doesn't sound quite as manicured as it was on 2001.
Yeah.
But also he was younger, so it's gonna come out different.
Well, like, from a vocal perspective too, like, just listening to his voice in general on here still sounds great.
Oh yeah.
And trust me, as we're both singers. We both sung gigs in the past. We know that it's not easy to hit the notes that he's hitting on here. He does it very admirably, and his voice, he's got a little bit more of a high pitch to it now.
Yeah.
It's a little bit tighter. It doesn't feel quite as loose.
Yeah, you can hear he's struggling a little bit.
Yeah. But that's years of touring, being on the road.
Yeah.
The guy's
Again.
Yeah, he's one of the best singers still in rock,
100%.
for sure.
No question.
So I don't think a lot of the criticisms that people have been saying online are definitely not warranted in that way.
Not warranted, and a little bit judgy.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I'm judgy, but that's like, to not even consider the fact that it's been 23 years later before you make a comment.
Yeah.
It's like, your voice was probably like super high 23 years ago. And now, like, you know what I mean? Like, just don't even.
Yeah, I know.
anyways.
It's not a valid criticism.
No,
So we'll just throw that away right now. Just not even entertain the idea. But all right, so Nice to Know You was really good. That was a different intro on there. Other songs on here, I think the only other one that had some major difference for me, I think, was later on in the album. and that was Echo. I think was the one that for me had a little bit. Go down on my notes here. Yep. Echo is the one that was a little bit different for me. So like. Had one of the bigger deviations. So there's like this big jam and extended part in the middle. I don't remember it having it in there. It's a softer song from Morning View, and I don't really remember it having that extended jam in there. And I thought that was really cool. So I wish they had done that on some of the other tracks on the Morning View 23. And then we were talking a little bit about Are You In too. Like that was a little bit different too. Some of the deviations on there made it a little bit different from the original Morning View.
Yeah, for sure. Did you want to go first or do you want me to
go
comment?
for it, yeah.
Okay. Let me just scroll down here. So like for me, the song Are You In was actually a very notable song on that album. Mm-hmm. It's just got this like right from the beginning, it hooks you with kind of like the spacey sounds, and then like the drums just like it's just like you're hooked right when you hear the drums, because that's the only instrument going on right now, and then you're just like, wow, it sounds really funky. But I did notice, what did I note here? That the drums are clearly a bit more different, as noted right when they kick in at the beginning of the song.
The beat's a little bit different, yeah.
Yeah, you can hear he's filling in a little bit more. Yeah. He's doing a little bit more, a few more tricks, and he's hitting a couple more things. Yeah. Not sure how I feel about that. I'm just like, whatever, kind of, okay. Again, that whole like making it different by doing that, but subtly, and not deviating too much away from the original sound, I guess. Right. And then there's that like really obvious like bass riff that comes in after like he does his drumming, where it's like do 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 do, like you know what I mean? Like I sound like an idiot trying to like you know what I mean? Yeah. But it's like the do 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 boom 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 right before it goes into like Mike playing the guitar. For me, in the original version, that like was huge,
very big, like prominent bass lick.
Yeah, because that makes you remember the song. That was a very memorable part of the song, and it kind of sets up the introduction of the song, right? Because he's like coming in with that really funky bass line. It was really prominent, but in this version, I noticed that it was a little quieter, and it wasn't like as like I'm right here.
Yeah, like, well, you know, we were saying they have a new bass player, and you think that'd be she does the lick, but yeah, maybe in the mix itself, it wasn't.
It doesn't have as much attitude.
Yeah, it doesn't have. You know what I mean?
mean?
Well, that was the Morning View was the last album that had their original bass player Dirk on there before Ben Kenny came in there, and now they have Nicole on there. So I did miss that riff a little bit. Yeah,
I just
still a chill song.
Yeah, it was one of my favorite parts of the song. Right, like that little riff coming in.
Yeah.
Oh, and one big part of that song was the clapping. You know, the clapping in the background. Yeah. Now I kind of. I don't know. It was very prominent for me as kind of like a part of the rhythm, percussion of that song in like the original version. But now it's kind of just sounds like it's like a background sound. I don't know. The clapping for me in that song like kind of really elevated the percussion element.
Well, this album, the one of the things about it is that it still continues the kind of that warm and sunny vibe that the original one has. I'm not sure. Did they go back? We'll have to check it out and see if they went back to the original place to re-record it. They might have. To go back and re-record it.
That would be interesting to know.
You know, I guess anytime you make a record in California, it's gonna be great. So it's gonna have that kind of vibe to it. And I think that Are You In? Yeah, still missing that bass, that little bass riff, but overall, it's still pretty cool song. And then there was was it
so far away?
Sorry. And then it was Mexico that was another song that you said that had a little bit of a different vibe to it.
Yeah, what did I think about Mexico? So one thing I noticed right away, I don't think this was on the 2001 version, but they seem to have put some kind of reverb or echo element on Brandon Boyd's voice in the song. Did you notice that at all?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, because it seems like a lot more, it seems like it's resonating a lot more. It's like, you know, it's just like really like, you can feel his voice. Right. So I'm like, okay, so all right, that's an interesting like little twist. But all in all, it's like the same song. He's still telling some guy to go fuck himself. And it's like
you only think about yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you can still hear the skating kind of like tone of those lyrics in this version, which is cool because it was very scathing in the 2001 version.
Yeah.
So again, not sure if it needed the reverb on his vocals. I kind of maybe would have preferred they kept it the same with just him singing raw without the reverb, but I understand that, you know, maybe his voice needed some help, or maybe they just needed to like even something out.
Yeah.
Or maybe I could be wrong on the two latter points I just made, and maybe they could have just wanted to do something different.
Yeah, well, you know, and there are some cool backup vocals on here as well. I think Nicole Rowe, who's the bass player, she's doing some harmonies on here, so that adds a different element to their sound as well, because they've never had that female voice in there before, which is really cool. And I think, like, in general, there isn't a lot of difference on here. Like we were saying, like, just to kind of wrap up our thoughts a little bit, those are the songs to me and to Danielle that really had the parts that really stood out to us as being really different from the original Morning View release. And so in general, for you, like, what are your final thoughts on Morning View 23? Do you think this was a successful release for the band? Do you think it was worth them going back and re-recording this album and putting out a new version of it?
So again, just kind of throwing it back to something that you had mentioned previously about the album, it literally just sounds like if you went to go see them live, that's what you would get. Yeah. It sounds like a live recording, not engineered, not manicured as it was on the 2001 version. Right. So again, throwing it back to my original answer for another one of your questions, no, I don't really think I'm not really sure what they tried to accomplish. Maybe it's something we need to look up. But they didn't need to do this, in my opinion. Yeah. Like, to be honest, if I want to hear a re-recording, it'd probably be Make Yourself. I would love to know if, like, they've still got it for doing that one. Right. I don't know, because I think, like, performance wise, Make Yourself was probably pretty challenging. There's a lot more like Brandon Boyd kind of like emceeing. Yeah. Is doing like a little bit of rapping, kind of like that fast talking, whereas like Morning View, it's a lot, he's like singing. I don't think he's at all like not rapping.
Yeah, he's not rapping. Like, he's not doing it quite. Fast talk. Yeah, the fast kind of like a little bit of that Chili Peppers, Faith No More kind of delivery. Yeah,
exactly, pretty much. So, I mean, again, it didn't faze me. The 23rd version.
Yeah, it's just the way it wasn't necessary. Like, it wasn't
necessary. Yeah, and I'm like, you know what, I'm proud of them for putting it out. Yeah. Because it was 23 years ago. That's like what, like a third of your life?
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah.
That's a third of your life ago, which is crazy. Yeah. It's cool that they did a re-recording, but
yeah, it's not essential.
It's not essential. Exactly.
I don't think we would want to go back and if we had our choice of listening to this new version or listening to the original version, I would always go with the original version.
Same.
I don't know if Taylor Swift fans feel the same conundrum when they listen to the Taylor's version of a lot of her albums, because the originals are the classics. Those are the versions that you remember, the ones that are kind of ingrained into your brain. And as we said, we have major memories of listening to this album. We have 23 years of listening to this thing.
For sure.
In this original format. So no matter what, as far as I'm concerned, they could, even if it's still a great effort. Like, they did a great job. Sure, it sounds great. The band sounds great. But even if they, sounded still even closer to the original, I would still want to listen to this. And so I think if it's an effort to regain the rights to the Morning View album, then for sure, definitely a good idea. An interesting experiment, but not necessarily an essential one. They didn't really have to do this. If it was purely creative, I would have preferred they just put out some new music. I know you probably don't care if they put out some new music, but even if they do, I'll play it for you anyways. You don't even have a choice. We'll just be in the car. I'll be like, hey, check this out.
Yep, that's fine. That's usually
Incubus.
That's how it's been going anyways.
Their new stuff's really good. Okay. It's really good. Have you heard? You like that, what was that one we played, that State of the Art song I played for you?
Yep, that was good.
You liked that one.
Yeah, I liked that one. Yeah.
A couple other ones. Yeah, they're decent.
Yeah, so I'll just keep relying on you to introduce me to the new stuff. But yes. A thought I just had, as you were kind of, having your final word there, was that Morning View was obviously done as a concept album.
Yeah.
It was a concept album that they were like, all right, we're getting the fuck off the grid. We're going somewhere and no one's going to know that we're here. There's not going to be any life here. We're just going to a fucking house and recording it. And I think they should have just left it at that.
Yeah.
You did not need to revive something that should have kind of only been touched once as like that novelty thing of like,
Right.
yeah, we're going to record here, kind of like how the Beatles recorded at what's that place called?
Abbey Road.
Abbey Road. Yeah, it's one of those like, it's done, leave it. Like you don't need to revisit it.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
No, yeah, I totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was definitely not. It was worth the try, but maybe not. Maybe not a keeper in our eyes. So if you were going to give this a score out of 5, which is what we do here on Rock Album Review, what would you give Incubus Morning View 23?
Maybe out of 5.
Out of 5.
3.5.
All right, giving it a 3.5 out of 5. I'll go with a 3 too.
Yeah.
It's a valiant effort, but we're still gonna
Yep.
listen to the OG.
And it does,
View.
yeah, and like it'll never erase the original version.
No, exactly.
Like-
it's like when they do a remake of a movie, right? It's
Yeah.
like people complain, oh, you can't remake that. Oh, this remake sucks. It's like, well, the original still exists. If
Yeah.
you don't want to watch the remake, that's fine. You can still watch the original. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah, exactly, for sure. I'll share that sentiment as well. Yeah, I just should have just left it.
Should have just left it.
Should have just left it.
All right. Well, thank you, Danielle, for coming on to this edition of Rock Album Review. We really appreciate your insight talking about Incubus, and we should have you on again to talk about more albums and more nostalgia because we like a lot of the same bands and we kind of grew up with a lot of the same bands. Yep. And when we first met, we discovered a mutual love of like obscure 2000s rock bands. Right?
Oh man.
So, yeah.
That was awesome.
Yeah, exactly. So
yeah. I hope I can come back here and give my unsolicited opinion again.
yes, anytime. Thank you. Well, let us know what you thought of Incubus 23 in the comments below. This is a little bit late, this review, but we wanted to do it anyways because we love Incubus and we love this record. So let us know what you thought of Incubus Morning View 23 down in the comments below. If you like this video, make sure to toss us a like. We'd appreciate that. Make sure to subscribe to us here over at the Nick Chino Music Channel and make sure to what is that one again? What is that symbol again?
It's a heart.
Heart.
Yeah, it's a Korean.
That's a Korean heart.
Yeah.
All right. So Danielle is hearting everybody out there in the audience. And then, follow me on social media at Nick Chino Music. And we'll see you guys again for another review here on the channel. Until then, throw up the devil horns, Danielle. Rock on, everybody.